Friends, Jon-Mark Patterson, the Reactionary Hippie, back at last. Such a long interval between videos. I suppose I should apologize. What is the reason? I'm a normal, busy person, a lot going on. The truth is, I'm also kind of shy in the sense that I don't love to hear myself speak or stare at myself on the screen. So between all that's going on this time of year and that inertia, it's hard to do these videos, but so interested in discussing ideas and appreciate so much that you take time to hear what I have to say. So I feel like I owe you more comments and more thoughts. And I have to say, I have a follower who was kind enough to, when I ran into him, to say, my wife and I were in Europe recently, and we were on a train between Luxembourg and France, and to pass the time, we listened to vintage Reactionary Hippie commentary, and I could not be more honored or flattered than that. So, as the kids say, let's generate some more content. Recently, an epigram that's a favorite of mine came to mind. Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to be quite famous. He was a distinguished Democratic senator from New York decades ago, also an expert on social policy, advised Democratic and Republican administrations on social policy, and he was both a thinker and a doer. He wanted to see the consequences of the ideas and what really happened when the plans were implemented and analyze those. So always appreciated him very much. And one of the famous quotation attributed to him is, "You are entitled to your own opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." And that is, of course, a great epigram, often misused. Now, facts aren't always so clear either because of the weaknesses, I suppose, if you put it that way, of human nature. We always take in facts and information from the outside world based on the assumptions and perceptions and heuristics that we already have in our own mind, based on our limited knowledge and our particular experiences. So what do we do with that? How do we really try to focus on facts and thereby frame our opinions in reasonable ways? Well, think of the difference between being an ideologue and being a prudent person. It's just the easiest thing in the world to have one tool and hit everything with it. You know, everything looks the same if you look at the world in a way that says, here's what it all means, right? Any new information just gets fit into the existing paradigm and structure that you've got, and life is easy, right? You can denounce everyone who is not consistent and as pure as you are and doesn't see the world the way you do. But without being so open-minded that you're empty-headed, it's truer to encounter the world with humility. I don't know everything yet. I've got to have a modest confidence in what I've struggled to know so far, but I've got to be open to what I don't know. And so, to me, that's living in prudence, and that's living in reality in the fact-based world. Prudence is the wisdom of picking the best alternative when none of them is a perfect alternative. Now, unfortunately, that said, we seem to live in a world that doesn't have time for prudent generalists any longer, people who have lived a lot, experienced a lot, thought about a lot of different things, and approached the world with humility. Our culture seems to empower elites and influencers who increasingly loudly tell each other repeatedly what they want to hear, or they echo only their narrow area of expertise and experience and think that applies to everything else without the humility to know that's not the whole story when you're making prudential judgments. Result of this, as I've commented on before, is you start to see institutions not serving larger goals in society, but just sort of perpetuating themselves for the benefits of the elites or those who benefit from having the institution in place rather than serving a larger population. And I think this is related to a fascinating idea called elite overproduction, which perhaps I can talk about another time. Now, it's not a comfortable way to live, but we've just got to move beyond the world inside our heads. Matthew Crawford might put it that way. We can't just keep trying to fit the world into what we already believe, get further and further confirmed in our prejudices. Instead, we got to be open to what we don't know, because that's the only way we're going to see the realities on the ground. I mean, a lot of us have part of the picture, but that blinds us to more of the rest of the picture, and it gets harder and harder to talk to other people who've got other pieces of the picture and more facts that might help us understand what's really going on. Okay, that's your opening abstract discussion. Let's move away from the abstract. I really want to talk about one of the biggest background facts of our time that is ignored, unnoticed, or denied by so many people. And today's candidate for that, I suppose I could come up with a bunch, is the demographic reality that the populations of all developed countries are radically transforming because of a collapse in birth rates that started some time ago, is ongoing, and is accelerating. The truth is we don't have the much discussed population explosion in our midst. We have a complete and acceleration population implosion. So I threw out the word demography. Well, that's a great SAT word, right? Demos, population, graphy, writing, recording. So it's the study and graphing and understanding of populations, what their characteristics are, how they're changing, what's going on with a population. So I'm an early Gen Xer. It is what it is. My childhood was dominated by cultural fears of population explosion. I mean, we had movies like Soylent Green. I hope you get to see that sometime. It's all these very well-fed extras scrambling for food in a future where they're supposed to be starving, and Charlton Heston being Charlton Heston. And there are books like The Limits to Growth and The Population Bomb. And there was a very well-funded group, which we would call well, I guess it was a nonprofit, we call it an NGO today, called Zero Population Growth. They had ads everywhere, and they had a lot of influence urging people to limit the number of children they had. And I think as a hangover from that, most people my age and even younger, certainly older, have the impression that overpopulation is the great threat stalking our world. So I did some research to make sure I got my numbers right. So, this commentary doesn't require research. I'm just going to make sure I get the numbers in front of me. But first question, okay, if we want zero population growth, what would the birth rate be per woman to maintain a steady population? So let's assume there's no immigration. It's a closed society. How do we get a population that neither declines nor grows over time? Zero population growth. Well, to get that state, the average woman needs to have 2.1 babies. Now, no one can have 2.1 babies, but you know how averages work. Now, if every person in a population who was born survived to reproduce, then the figure would be 2.0. But even in an advanced country, like we're assuming, with low infant mortality rates, the United States has fairly low infant mortality rates. The sad truth is they're starting to rise again, but that's, again, another story. With some small number of infant mortality and some children dying of diseases and accidents, you have to get to about 2.1 babies per woman to have replacement level, right? Because it takes mostly, for now, 2 people to have a baby. So to replace themselves, they need to have 2 babies plus that 0.1 to make up for the people who never make it. Okay, so what are current total fertility rates, meaning number of expected births per woman in the current population of the world or various countries? Well, the USA is 1.6. Right now, total fertility, 1.6 babies per woman. That number was 3 babies per woman in 1965 at the very end of the baby boom and the beginning of what used to be called the baby bust, my generation, Gen X. They hadn't seen anything yet. In Mexico, the current total fertility rate is 2.1 babies per woman. So that zero population growth in Mexico. In 1965, it was 6.75 babies per woman in Mexico. Now, here's an example of how studying these numbers, knowing the facts on the ground, can lead you to make some reasonable conclusions about what's coming in the future. When those 6.75 babies per woman in Mexico were born in 1965, we can see in retrospect that by the 1980s, they were looking elsewhere for opportunities, and there was a great push for migration from Mexico. But right now, there are 2.1 babies per woman being born in Mexico. So I'll make you the bet that there won't be significant pressure for migration from Mexico to the United States, at least not from native Mexicans, in the decades to come. Interesting stuff. But that's the reality on the ground. That's who was born then and who's born now. So where's the world's lowest rate of total fertility? It's South Korea, believe it or not. 0.8 babies per woman. 0.8, lowest in the world. It was 5 in 1965. This is unprecedented. There's never been a transformation of behavior like that in the world. The highest rate in the world is Niger in Africa, 6.7 per woman. It was only slightly higher, 7.5 in 1965. Seems to be drifting down slowly, but that's still a very high rate. The world as a whole is 2.4, which is less than half as much as the 5 per woman in 1965. But, of course, it's unevenly distributed. Still high rates in sub-Saharan Africa, slightly above replacement level in the Middle East and most of Latin America and parts of South Asia. But it's below replacement level in every developed country in the world that I checked, with 2 exceptions, South Africa and Israel. And those countries have some unique demographic characteristics, but they're the only plausibly advanced developed countries in the world that have even high enough birth rates to sustain their population. So if birth rates have been so low for so long now, why haven't most people noticed? Well, I think I can explain this with a concept called demographic momentum, right? And the main fact here is there's a time lag between when babies are born and when women are of childbearing age, right? So the cohort of babies now is not the same as the cohort of men fathering and women conceiving babies now. But there's still an iron law here, right? If you're not born now, you can't show up in the future to conceive or father babies. So only the babies born now can become the parents of the future. So demographic momentum can go this way. Birth rates have been going down. Why does our population keep going up? Well, because it takes 70 or 80 years for people to die. They're still counted in the population, but they might be well past any childbearing age, so there's no chance they're going to add more babies to the population. And those women born 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years ago are still moving through the system of childbearing age and having babies. So the population seems to keep rising for a while, or it does keep rising for a while in the total number of people. So when demographers noticed this years ago, they said, oh yeah, the momentum's still going, the population's still going to rise for a while. They just kind of assumed it would settle in to zero population growth or just basic replacement level. They really did. I don't think anybody saw it shooting, that total fertility rates would rocket down so low and keep going to lower and lower levels that we've never seen before since we've recorded this sort of thing. So now the momentum is starting to go the other way, where birth rates have been so low that nobody's showing up to have more babies. And even if the rate went way up, which there's no reason to think it will, but let's just say tomorrow the rate of women having babies went much higher, they had more babies per woman, there still is such a small number of women who can have children in the cohort that the population is going to continue to decline. Very interesting. We'd have to have many sustained years of higher rates of births before that trend would reverse itself. So now the momentum is going in the other direction. So this starts to show up in raw numbers, right? It's hard to find some of these numbers. West Virginia does not keep very good public health stats, but I picked it as a state because it's small. It's doesn't have a lot of economic dynamism or a lot of people moving in or a lot of immigration. So I thought, well, relatively steady, compared to the U.S. as a whole, older, whiter. In 2020, in West Virginia, there were 17,323 births. There were 26,106 deaths. And as an aside, this might be another topic, including 1,275 drug overdoses. You know, it's hard to believe that, there are only like 15 times as many babies born as there were drug overdose deaths in West Virginia. It's kind of scary. Let's pick a whole country. And I picked Italy from 2019. These trends got a lot worse with COVID, but let's go pre-COVID. Italy in 2019 had 420,000 live births, roughly, and 646,000 deaths. I did note that in 2020 there were 746,000 deaths in Italy and fewer than 400,000 births. So the population will collapse unless there's a massive increase in migration from other places, which will bring other issues and current concerns of its own. So, what are the trends? Well, I don't think they're good. I should be pessimistic based on what I see around me. And part of it's just the feel that you have in the air. There's kind of an anti-natal culture in a lot of cultural spaces where it's just assumed you aren't going to have children. People claim it's a positive good not to have children because of climate change. And I'm not going to bring anybody into this world of terror and war and suffering. And all I can say to that is the world's kind of always looked that way if you looked hard enough. There have always been places where there's suffering and deprivation and starvation. If anything, we're better off than ever. But maybe they want to believe there's overpopulation to justify not having more children. I'm telling you, the problem is we don't have enough children showing up. And I don't know who's going to take care of tomorrow's elderly when there are so small numbers of children who will be young adults in the future. And some of the discussions, and this is tough territory, but some of the discussions of abortion just really shock me because I can respect an argument that says, look, abortion's here to stay. It should be, it's a necessary evil. It's going to happen. We can't even pretend to ban it. We just have to sort of manage and regulate and understand it's going to happen and make it, I suppose, safe and rare is the rhetorical twist there. But we have people now who treat abortion like a sacrament, like a positive good or something to be celebrated. And I find that a terrible symbol of a culture of death and not a culture that has an affection for life. There's also this consumerist mindset, right, that children are a lifestyle choice, an accessory for their parents, a way for their parents to show and signal how wonderful they are. And that's a terrible problem. I mean, we have to get rid of this individualist projection into the world and be humbled by the fact that children are part of a family unit. They're new human beings. They have their own dignity and worth and value, period, from day one. And it's a sacred trust to help them grow up. They will be the link between the past and the future. And we hope that they become productive adults, ready to pass on, ready to transmit culture, ready to live, ready to bring new children into the world when their time comes. So I have to say, Rachel and I sometimes play this game as we walk the streets downtown, and it's you should try it. I mean, I see people pushing what look like baby strollers or carts, and sometimes we say, okay, I'll bet you, is that a baby or a dog? Hey, I like dogs, but people these days tend to obsess over and anthropomorphize their pets rather than having children. And a topic I'll certainly try to take on at some point. We live in a time that is not unprecedented, I might say, of sexual confusion and supposed gender fluidity. And it's based on this sort of abstract will that an individual can just wake up one day and say, this is what I am, or another day, this is what I am. This is a time of social contagion where people who should be pitied or helped are encouraged to think in ever stranger ways about a non-existent fluidity of sexual identity. But it's a further divorce from the realities of life and of being part of a great chain of being where my parents brought me into being, and if it should work out that way, I can bring other children into being. I know economic realities are really tough for people who want to have children, and I think if we don't defeat the consumerist gerontocracy that rules our country right now, it'll just become less and less friendly for families. Cultures and populations have collapsed before, though. They have. There's going to be a future, and it's going to belong, by definition, to those who show up for it. So think about this. The real reality of our world is that the culture of life is under challenge, that we encourage more selfish, more individually focused, more consumerist, more malleable identities for people instead of being embedded in our own families and a culture of life and a culture that's real and a culture that looks to the past for guidance and looks with hope to the future. If you are thinking about having a child or more children, try to find a way to do it. There's no ideal or easy time to have a child. Some of you, if you wait, you'll find the window closed altogether. But you are the link. You are the link between the past and the future. You're living now. And your future and the world's future are just calling out to be born and to come in existence through you. And if you can't have children, or you don't want to have children, I understand and respect that. But I'd ask you also to try and support the families you know. Help them in the upbringing of their children. Be that special aunt, uncle, cousin, neighbor, coach, teacher. Reach out. And let's all think about changing our politics and our culture to support again family formation, the thriving of children, and real connections between generations. We can't stop having babies. We can't stop raising children. We can't stop these connections, this affirmation of life. So, these are supposed to get shorter. I'm taking too much of your time. I appreciate your attention. Thank you for letting me string these ideas together and just suggest that you live in hope, that you live as productive, humble, joyful people. And on the days that you and I slip, let's know that there's a foundation to go back to. And this is, with gratitude, the Reactionary Hippie signing off and wishing you well in supporting the culture of life and children and joy. Thanks.